we are going to discuss how to investigate victims of big data. We will focus on refugees, children, and other vulnerable groups, workers as well. I will give a short intro where I will present some kind of PM's work in this area around, especially around COVID, and how data were mismanaged during COVID. And later I will give the floor to two of my colleagues, Klara Votavova, who will present the key findings and takeaways on surveillance and algorithmic management at the Amazon warehouses in Central Europe. And then we will have Camille Schyns, if I pronounced it correctly, who will present key takeaways from his investigations around automated decision for vulnerable families and individuals that he did together with some of his colleagues at the EU Observer. So I will now go quickly, I hope quickly, through my presentation. Also, I will do the presentation, but you can also interrupt me if you have a question, either in chat or some other way. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me. I'm usually the one who likes to ask questions. I'm not the one who enjoys so much presenting. So feel free to shoot questions as we envisage this more as a discussion. So as I mentioned, BN has been working on basically monitoring of digital rights in mostly Southeast and Central Europe. And we just started actually doing that before COVID. So we monitored in general some countries of the Western Balkans, such as Bosnia, Serbia, North Macedonia, and 3 EU countries, so to say, Romania, Croatia, and Hungary. But in overall, I think I looked also at the work our colleagues at EDRI did and Digital Freedom Fund that were also part of this seminar. They also did a lot of work in this area around COVID and data, and there are definitely 4 key trends in the whole Europe and maybe we can say even worldwide. First one is obviously the rise of biosurveillance. I'm sure you are all aware of a number of apps, tracking devices, forms, etc., that we were all filling in voluntarily or not, depending on the context. So in that sense, there is an exponential rise of biosurveillance and usage of that, but in the same time, quite poor accountability when it comes to control and oversight over the data. Then the other trend, I believe, also quite worldwide, not just Europe focus, is censorship and misinformation. Misinformation on one side coming mostly on social media, different anti-vaxxer or different kind of groups spreading false information, causing fear, etc. I think we were quite flooded the last and this year. And also, on the other hand, censorship under the pretext of security situation and quite difficult health situation. And then we had a lot of cases where media were censored to report or didn't have access to the data. Camille will talk more about this, but as you know, a lot of our lives moved to online, and that led to many AI solutions. But whether these are really solutions or not, we will discuss later, and we will also discuss in most of the cases, lack of control how these data are used and what kind of decisions are made. And then general, as I mentioned, erosion of human rights in many countries, especially in the countries from where I'm coming from. There was introduction of various legislation and laws that aim to curb either freedom of movement or freedom of expression. These laws were usually introduced quite backdoor style. It means emergency procedure without proper voting, without oversight of the parliaments, etc. I think the most extreme cases were in Serbia and Hungary. Our numbers, I believe, are quite huge comparing the number of countries we have. So we saw just in the 4 months of the pandemic, there were 163 cases of breaches of digital rights. And for me, I think the most interesting part and the reason why I'm in this panel as well is that the ordinary people were actually the ones who were most affected by these violations. So all these violations actually targeted the citizens, and I will explain a bit more later. Those were actually usually LGBT groups, refugees, people belonging to different ethnic communities, women, and journalists. And then, as you see in my slide, actually, most of these cases didn't result in any kind of accountability. So out of 163 cases, 139 actually were not resolved. And in 45 cases, there are no even perpetrators found. And I don't know how good you see this, but in general, these two graphics aims to show you actually how the violation rised as the pandemic was actually moving forward. So as you see, the violation started actually in bigger number in February as the pandemic started, and then as the countries were introducing different legislation, different lockdowns, different measures, the number of violations rise. So you will see that the biggest number is actually in April and May. When it comes to the number of countries, you will see violations here and the number of months, but Serbia is definitely the country that leads this record of digital rights violations. Types of violations I already mentioned. Obviously, the biggest number is the leaks of different health data and misinformation, so different data breaches. So key trends, as I mentioned, data breaches and illegal processing. In most of the cases, that meant that either authorities or hospitals or hackers or different groups simply leaked personal information from patients, either through different lists or just creating their own lists. In the case of Serbia, we even had the whole information system at one point available to everyone to see, simply because the security was not good enough. Threats, hate speech, and discrimination. Most of them, as I mentioned, towards LGBT groups, towards Jewish communities, towards Roma groups, especially in Hungary. Then a lot of discrimination against groups coming from China. Then people who were reporting on the issues, journalists mostly, they were also in many cases arrested. I think the most dramatic situations were in Hungary and in Serbia, where we had a few arrests and pressures on media to either take down their content, or their websites were actually enabled. And I will finish with this part, and we can discuss that, I hope, at later stage, is that in most of the cases we or the authorities couldn't find out who are the attackers. So basically there was a huge impunity when it comes to digital rights violation, and you will see in Camille's case as well, we didn't have so much in that front when it comes to finding those who are responsible. And then in general, the responses of the states were quite harsh, either to arrest someone or fine someone, and not actually find any sustainable or long-term mechanism that will deal with these violations in line with the human rights conventions. So I will end here, and I also use my 10 minutes that we agreed, and I will give the floor to Clara, who was also our fellow, and I'm really proud of that. She did quite a good story, an important story around Amazon, and how Amazon warehouses in Central Europe were using actually surveillance and algorithmic management to control or oversee their workers. So Clara, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Just give me a second to upload my presentation. Okay, just a second. Oh, I hope it works. Yeah, it should.
Yeah, it works.
We see it fine.
Okay, yeah, I don't, but oh, no, my computer is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you and we see the presentation. So
Okay. I will try. I don't know, because I am in a hotel room in Bilbao, and yeah, it was working out, but now it's a bit blurry. So maybe let me refresh.
We hear you well, and you are not freezing or anything like that
Yeah,
from our side.
my computer is not. I can't see you that well. Yeah, good. Now it looks like it's working on my side. Sorry for this. Hello? Hello?
We hear you, but we don't see you.
Yeah, but we cannot see you.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we see the presentation.
Oh, okay. The camera just went off. Yes. Now you can see me.
Not yet.
Okay. Maybe I will just start talking, and I hope the webcam will start in the middle. I am sorry about this. Let me just present myself. My name is Klára Votavová. I'm a journalist at Voxpot. For a long time, I have been interested in big tech, social responsibility. Now I'm turning a bit more into these issues of industry in general and economic relations between Eastern and Western Europe. But this story is something that I wrote, as Maria has already said, I'm not a presenter now. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so this story is something I wrote as part of the digital rights program for journalists that was conceived by Bern. I wrote it in the spring, and it was published in September. It is called In Central Europe, Concerns over Toll and Fairness of Amazon Algorithms. Basically, in this story, I was focusing on Amazon algorithms in Czech and Polish warehouses. It is important to highlight that Amazon is quite a famous company, and therefore their use of algorithms have already been investigated to some extent in the US. But I wanted to focus on this region of Central Europe. I think it is important because the logistics sector in the region is really booming. We can also say that this region often serves. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Everything is working. We only don't see you, but we hear you well. Yeah.
It
and
was
we see your presentation.
Your camera stopped working because for some reason you lost moderator role, but now you should be able to turn your camera on again.
Yeah, but I can't see anything. Okay. Oh, now.
I think it looks like we lost.
I think we lost Clara, but I'm sure she's maybe refreshing her window and coming back in a second. So everybody, please bear with us for just a few seconds, and we'll have Clara back, I'm sure.
Yeah. Also, I know her story, so I can tell you as well as a backup what was it about. But let's see.
I can also repeat that if there are a lot of details on a slide, you can maximize it in the lower right corner so you can see more details. Sorry, I was interrupting you, Marija.
No. I just wanted to say that you know Clara's story, because we worked with her on publishing that, and as she mentioned, I think it was the first story that was done focused on Czech and Polish warehouses. Previously, colleagues did a lot on Amazon in US, but the Central Europe was not covered, despite the fact that there were a lot of cases brought by the workers in Amazon in front of courts. Clara can tell you more, or I don't know if you maybe want that we go to Camille so that we don't wait too much.
Might be a good idea, because I don't see Clara coming back for the moment.
Okay.
She may be running for another Wi-Fi or something.
Yeah. Camille, are you fine that you take over the presentation?
Clara's coming back now.
Yeah. I see Clara's just back. So
let's see.
I mean, otherwise I take over, but.
Clara, you are back among us. You're muted, but we see you.
Yes, I'm back. I'm so sorry. I don't understand how this happened, but I'm so sorry. I will try to start where I finished. So as I was saying, I wrote this as part of the digital rights program for journalists organized by Bern. As I have already also said, Amazon is something that has already been investigated to some extent, but I wanted to focus on this region of Czechia and Poland because there the logistics sector is really currently booming, and this is also because it often serves as some kind of a cheap warehouse for Germany. This means that the work there is cheaper, the rent there is cheaper as well. Often companies use this region to just store goods and pick goods that is then sold in Germany. This is also the case with Amazon. What I found out in my story, I hope I'm not a presenter. Okay, now I will be. Good. So what I found out in my story is that indeed in Amazon warehouses, people are guided and evaluated by this algorithmic system or algorithmic management system based on data previously collected about them and their colleagues. In practice, this means that they have a scanner or a computer. It tells them where they should go, what they should pick, and how fast. And then it feeds into a system that collects all the data about all the workers, and it sets every couple of weeks some norms that the workers should fulfill. It's also important to highlight that these norms are relative. This means that everything is counted compared to the other workers. And not absolutely that you would. This means that you don't have a certainty about what is the correct amount that you should pick, for instance, but it constantly evolves. This algorithmic management system is proprietary, and it is used in all Amazon warehouses, also outside Czechia and Poland. It is not very intelligible to the workers. I have had cases when people tell you, even managers don't know how to make it work for us. They would tell you what you can do to work faster, to make the system happy, but it turns out it doesn't work. So it's really difficult for the workers to understand what they should do to satisfy the system. Anyway, if they fail to meet the norms, they can get a warning, and after these 3 such warnings, they can be fired. And here it is also important to highlight that in Amazon, the positions, they differ. So, for instance, if you are a good picker and you can satisfy the system as a picker, you may not be a good loader, loading into the trucks. For instance, if somebody wants to punish you, or if your manager wants to punish you, he can send you to a different position where you don't have that good results, and you can get fired as a result of that. On the other hand, of course, that can also be used as a reward, so they can upgrade you, or they can send you to some position where it's easier for you to fulfill the system. So this is just to highlight that the human factor is also quite important in Amazon, even though the algorithms are used there to evaluate the workers. Something about my other findings. I think it's really important to enforce a legislation that is already existing. And there are 2 streams of this legislation. One is GDPR, of course, the General Data Protection Regulation, which says that if you want to collect and process someone's personal data, and the movement can be assessed as a personal data, then you would have to justify that. And Amazon, as a justification for this, uses workers' consent, so they have to fill a form when they start working in Amazon. But according to the European Data Protection Board, these forms should not actually be used in worker-employee relations, because it is not evident that the workers can do this in their free will. Another stream of regulation that is important to consider here is local labor codes, because they usually stipulate for which reasons workers can be fired. And this is actually what the Polish trade union organization Inicjatywa Pracownicza used when they went to the court against Amazon. Basically, this was a case where an employee was terminated in 2016, and the trade union organization challenged it at the court. And the court agreed with the trade unions. They said that the automatic system does not show which results the employees should have in order to be safe, because, as I have said, it is counted relatively, not absolutely, and therefore, according to the Polish courts, this is against the local labor code. This also shows the importance of trade unions for law enforcement. Here, just a note, of course, the workers, they don't usually know their rights. They are quite often vulnerable people coming from poor regions. Often they are bussed 80 kilometers to Amazon warehouses and back. They don't have many better options or where to find employment, and they are not very well educated about, what Amazon can do, for instance, vis-a-vis data protection. Just to give you a final, about how I was writing the story. I would like to highlight that it's really quite difficult to investigate internal processes of private companies because unlike public authorities, for instance, they really have no transparency obligations. You can't use, any, we call it 106 in Czechia, but you can't ask them. They are not. You can't ask them, or you can ask them, but they are not obliged to answer. This means that if you talk with the PR of companies, they usually just give you this PR gibberish, or they don't really respond in very concrete terms, which is also something that happened to me. They didn't really respond. Amazon didn't really respond to most of the things that I asked them. Also, there was no public data that I could investigate. There can be some leaks, but I didn't find any. And therefore, my sole sources were actually current and former employees, which usually with Amazon, it is quite helpful to talk with trade unions because there the people are not afraid to speak. The former employees are also not afraid to speak. Okay, and one other thing that I used was actually the court procedure or the conclusions of the courts in Poland. So this is one other thing that you can use if it's been tried. But otherwise, it's very difficult to find any public data. And therefore, I also didn't really learn any new techniques as a journalist. I didn't do any data analysis, for instance, just same old interviews. So yeah, and some final considerations of my story. It's not just Amazon. Algorithms are really becoming a norm in logistics, in e-commerce, and often like the companies wouldn't know where the goods is. They really have to ask the computer. The computer is operating the movement of goods, but it's also operating the movement of workers. And if there are any journalists who are interested in this topic here at this session, I would really encourage you to dive into this because I think there is really a lot of cases of labor rights abuse here. Also, I would like to say that enforcement and education about rights of workers is really crucial. And if we don't do this, then new legislation will not suffice on its own. Camille will talk a little more about this, but in the current EU proposal, there is a current EU proposal on AI regulation, which actually would like to, or the Commission would like to deem algorithmic management of workers as something as a high-risk application. Which would mean that it would have to be it would be assessed for risks before it starts to be used, but also periodically. But from my experience investigating this topic, I have quite low confidence that this would be enforced properly, also seeing how GDPR is not really enforced properly. This will be all from me. I thank you very much for your attention. These are my trade union sources, by the way. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I'm sorry again for the start of my presentation. I'm at holidays in Bilbao and I don't know how this happened. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. No, the presentation was good and we completely understand the drama around hotel rooms and internet connections. And also thank you for talking with us, even though you're on holiday. Yeah, I just wanted to add up on your presentation and something that Marius was also mentioning in comments. There was also quite a big story. I'm not sure whether it resulted in a case with the apps and workers for the grocery platforms, the grocery delivery platforms. There was a big case in Germany with Gorillas, which is an app that delivers groceries, and basically they also had quite a big workers uprising because of the working conditions there. And in that case, the issue was that they were not delivering in the envisaged time. So the management would measure the estimated time that takes you from the place that you are taking your deliveries to the place where you are delivering. So, and it caused like quite a big public attention. So I'm curious just to know what happened with this case in Poland and in Czech Republic, whether it resonated among the general audience.
To be honest, there are periodically some stories about these services, about these delivery services, but as far as I know, there has been no such in these two countries. Yeah, so it did not resonate particularly.
Okay, thank you. Now we move to Camille, who is our also colleague, investigative journalist, and as I mentioned, he worked on a story for the EU Observer around the EU AI laws and how they actually cause injustice to different vulnerable groups. Thank you very much, Camille. I'm giving you now the floor and the presenter role.
Yeah, thanks, Marija, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak here today about the story that I did together with three colleagues whose names you see here. So it's Alina Janšur from Belarus, Greta Rosenfondan, who's Swedish, and Sarah Pils, who's German, and who I've also seen among the audience. It's very good to see part of our team here. Myself, I'm Dutch, so it's a very international team for sort of quite an international topic as well. Because what we sort of noticed and became interested in was how across Europe there were these stories popping up about abuses of algorithms and automated decision-making systems. Like stories like you've spoken about, Clara, were other stories that we saw that had to do with banks deciding to use very arbitrary conditions to give loans to people, or social profiling to assist social services in mapping which children would be in at-risk communities. And I think a lot of these relied on AI and automated decision making, and after the fact, or after sort of close scrutiny, they often turned out to be discriminating, or at least otherwise biased. The story we told in our EU Observer article was at least in part that of Roger Derks, who's a Dutch father of two, who got targeted. He got accused by the Dutch tax authority of having made fraudulent child benefits claims. So in the Netherlands, they have a system where parents receive benefits that they then use to pay for childcare, and childcare is really expensive. So what happened to Roger Derks was that I think after a year, the tax authority assessed that he was suspected of fraud, and he was asked to repay about 60,000 euros, and because obviously he did not immediately have that money, he had to pay an additional, over the years, an additional 8,000 euros, more or less, in fines because of missed payments and so on. So really what we wanted to understand was sort of how could this happen, and then what's being done about it. And one of the things that sort of got onto our radar was that the fact that the EU was launching this proposal to regulate AI, and this would be launched by the European Commission in April 2021. So we started, in addition to sort of exploring the story of someone like Roger Derricks, we started to look at how fair was this process of policy making around this AI proposal, and would this regulation be the start of offering protection for people from these systems that have bias or can be discriminating or are unfair in many ways. So with that in mind, I think the first thing that we started looking at was lobby meetings. And I think this is something that's in part at least publicly available, and maybe to sort of pick up on Clara's remark about sort of new techniques. Here I think we used a bit of data journalism. Some of my colleagues spearheaded that. I'm myself not that good at it, but they wrote a script, and the script logged all the EU meetings that had to do with AI, and what we saw here was that there were 152 meetings that the EU Commission conducted since von der Leyen came into office, and over 2/3 of those were with companies and business associations, and that meant that less than 1/3 would be with sort of the NGOs, the labor unions or the trade unions, and other type of advocacy groups that would generally argue, I think, the other side of what business interests would be proposing. And then we started when we saw this imbalance, we started to think about, okay, what did these industry representatives and groups, what did they want with that proposal? What happened in those meetings? What did they lobby for? Were a number of things, but one of the things that was clear from both from documents that we obtained through Freedom of Information requests and also from basically a public consultation process where the EU asked anyone that was interested in submitting their position papers or their opinions on what should be in the new regulation. That there were a couple of things, but one of them was, okay, we want more AI to be used in the public sector. We think the public sector would be a good sort of way of building public confidence in the use of artificial intelligence and automated decision-making systems. And the other big thing was self-regulation. So we want a lot of the industry representatives, big tech, in their position papers, they emphasized that they wanted their internal control systems to be the basis for basically deciding if a system is fit to be put on the market. They didn't want a third-party independent assessment. And the bit when I sort of read through Clara's presentation and article, I went back and I looked at sort of what did Amazon have to say during this consultation process, and because we didn't focus so much on Amazon in our reporting, it was more sort of Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, which were the most active. But Amazon as well was sort of very clear. They said we only want a focus on high-risk applications, and they specifically talked about things like self-driving cars and a couple of other things. They were quite clear that to them worker management would not fall within that category. I think this is from a freedom of information request from Digital Europe. I just put that in there to highlight. I think Digital Europe is a business association, so it represents all the big tech companies at the European level. It's quite a good bellwether to get an idea of what they wanted from the process. And there they say, focus on public sector for trust and voluntary labeling, possibly based on high-level expert group assessments. So I think this it was clear what they wanted from this process, and I think when we then saw the EU regulation being published, we really dug into sort of what is in this regulation. It's very technical. AI systems and AI management is really difficult to understand, so we really had to educate ourselves on all of these matters. But what we saw also was that the first reports, when this proposal was launched, was the first reports really focused on this being the first global regulation for artificial intelligence systems, which in some respects is true. But it was also reported as being very harsh on big tech. It's like EU strikes back at big tech, and these were the headlines. But what we found when really digging into it was that there was a bit of another side to that. So a lot of what they call high-risk systems, like the use of algorithms in policing, in courts, in sort of judicial system, in social benefits, like the case we'd seen with Roger Derricks, and in worker management, like at Amazon, they continue to be permitted under the regulation. And all of these are also assessed internally. So the company itself would need to do the assessment to say, I, Amazon, certify that this system meets the EU requirements according to this proposal. And these are things like, you need to have sort of risk management, transparency, and a possibility for a human to be in the loop. That doesn't mean that there actually has to be a human in the loop. And together with this, the EU also said, okay, we really want to have, we see AI as an important growth market, and we commit to invest 1 billion per year in AI. And they use the phrase, we want to make the public sector a trailblazer for AI. So from that, we sort of judged there is a genuine desire to have more of these automated decision-making systems, and there is a relative leeway for companies, despite it being classified as high risk, to do their internal assessments. I'll briefly sort of go through a couple of the limits. Like I think a lot of people, like both of you before as mentioned, it's often difficult to find people that have been negatively affected. There's a lot of harm that will go undetected. People simply don't know, or even when they when a decision negatively impacts them, a decision from an AI system, often there's no explanation. It's just a yes or no. It's not like Amazon's algorithm, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Clara, but they may not exactly tell you the reason why you're being reprimanded. It's more, okay, our algorithm detected something was off. And I think that's in itself a problematic development. we did get in our case, we did get a lot of information through either freedom of information request, or a lot of it is available in the public domain. But one of the things we also found is that sometimes, especially when it comes to email communication, there's a lot that public authorities are able to black out as a result of GDPR. And I think that's an interesting sort of development, in the sense that it provides a bit of a shield for powerful actors, that they say we can't release this because of it may violate personal information. And then the other bit is that the 152 meetings that we logged, those are only of very senior officials. So junior officials, those that may be meeting much more often, we had indications that they had thousands of meetings with on this legislation. They don't have to declare their meetings, so we don't really know much about that. This is now being discussed in the EU Parliament, so I would encourage everyone that's interested to have a look at what's in the regulation and to flag important bits to those in the EU Parliament that will be scrutinizing this. I think, as Marija also said in her presentation, we've seen sort of a proliferation of these systems in response to the pandemic, and I think part of that is or it's accelerated a move towards the uptake of these systems, and I think we need to continue questioning those in the public interest, or who do these systems serve, and how can we make sure that regulation addresses or provides protections for those that are being impacted. And I think part of that we try to do by really scrutinizing this process and making sure that it's a transparent process of policy making. And I think that sort of goes to second part of our story that's forthcoming. But here we really looked at another element, which is the involvement of tons of experts in these policy making processes. And as it turns out, a lot of those experts are funded directly or work for institutions that receive funding from big tech, that they're supposed to sort of provide recommendations for how it should be governed. So it's a whole web of conflict of interest that we'll be talking about a little bit more in the future. And then sort of to wrap up, for people affected, people like Roger Derricks, who we told the story, whose story we told, it's really, it remains really tricky to get even recognition, and then once you have recognition, to get compensation. I think the latest figures in the Netherlands, if I'm correct, is that only 10% of the claims for compensation have actually been processed and paid out, which means there's just numerous people that have been affected that are waiting for compensation. And like I said, there's a lot of people that don't even know they've been wronged by these systems, and I think it's really important to tell their stories and to help them fight for the recognition that they deserve. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Camille. I think the presentation was quite detailed, but also for others who are interested more into this, they should definitely read your story as well, because it gives more details. And for me, I just had one follow-up question, and also others feel free to write in the chat if you have questions for us as well. But you mentioned FOI requests, so I'm wondering how much time actually it took you to get the responses. Because, for example, the experience I often had with the FOIA request, especially in this area, is that first, a lot of people in public institutions don't really understand what I'm asking and what I'm requesting. And then the first response would be that either my request is not complete, or that I need to provide some additional information, or that they are not institution in charge of that. So there's really a lot of going back and forth. And then when I finally submit my request, then depending on the type of request, it usually takes me a month and a half to actually get the answers. And often the answers are not really what I was looking for. And that is especially related, for example, looking into questions around security and surveillance, because the response I often get is that this is the issue of security, private data. We mentioned GDPR often as an excuse. So basically then this leaves you only to hoping you will get something else from some other more traditional sources.
Yeah, I think in terms of time, I think it took a long time to get the documents. I think I have to say the EU system is, well, first of all, it's free, so they don't charge anything for documents that they release or requests that they process, which I think is positive. But I do think the processing times are quite long. So I think for requests that we submitted maybe at the start of March, it may have taken at least 2 or 3 months before we received documents. And in part that was because I think they have 10 or 14 working days to process the request. But then they asked for more time because our request was deemed, or some of our requests were deemed fairly complicated. And then you could be in a situation where after that period, they say, oh, we can only, like your request is too big. We can only give you, say, 10 documents and please pick which ones you want. And I think, of course, there are means to appeal and challenge, but it takes a lot of time investment and resources to be able to really do that, and planning. And I think in the end, when we did get the documents, I think they were quite comprehensive. So we were very satisfied with the information we got, but definitely a time-consuming practice.
Thank you, Camille. Sarah says that she has 2 questions for Clara, but until she types, I just wondered, and that's a question for both of you, because we all mentioned that we use traditional ways of reporting, and a lot of people expect when you investigate tech that it's all around algorithms, big tables, sleek data, etc. But in essence, it all takes to good old interviews. So I'm wondering, like, what would be your tip for a reporter if she wants to investigate the big data and vulnerable groups?
Okay, I think that the court proceedings are quite a good tip. This is also what was actually advised to us by Bern. Yeah, as I dived into it, the courts, they may have some information in case they already tried cases such as the one I talked about. Yes, then of course it's helpful to first start with the secondary sources, as always. And thirdly, okay, in the cases of worker relations, I think it's really good to go to trade unions. But I don't have anything else than that, because just I don't know where else to find the data.
Thank you, Clara. Camille?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I do definitely think there's a lot of traditional methods that are worth exploring. I mean, our story focused on the EU process, and I think there's just an enormous amount of data that is publicly available there as well. For example, it can be very revealing how much basically people put in position papers during public consultation processes. So you will see, if you want to know exactly how a company like Google or Microsoft, or really just anyone else, feels about a certain regulation and what should and should not be in it, I think that's really a good place to start. But I guess the difficulty there is also that there's during those processes there will be like thousands of responses that are received. So just going through them takes massive amounts of time, which also means that for policymakers to go through them, they often rely on external actors that are contracted to summarize and analyze those responses. So I think it's that is one of the things that we looked at, and I think there's a wealth of information in the public domain. You just need to look a little bit to find that.
Okay, thank you, Camille. So, Sarah typed this because that's my inexperience with the platform. I thought that Sarah needs to type this, but apparently Sarah could also ask the questions. So anyway, because I already bothered Sarah to type this, I will read this for everyone. So Clara, since we made the experience that it's hard to find people who really know that they are affected by algorithms, you said in your research workers and bosses at Amazon really did know that they were affected by algorithm. Has there been any mention of how they want to react to that in sense of strikes from the workers or taking the decision to abolish the algorithmic systems from side of the bosses? And then later we also have a question for Camille from I think Frederico's, if I am not mistaken, but yeah, I will go to that question later. Clara?
Yes. Okay. One thing that I didn't highlight during my presentation is that there was a bit of a different environment in Czechia and in Poland, and that the Polish trade unions were much more progressed when it came to investigating these cases and fighting against them. If I when I try to describe the Czech side of the story, it's really that the regular workers, they tell you we are constantly under surveillance. They tell you that they know that they have the scanners, they have to carry them at all times. They know that they have the norms. They know everything. It's like common knowledge there. The thing is, they often don't know, as I've already highlighted, if it's something that Amazon can do, or if it's something that is maybe breaching their rights. So as I said, this is a question of education about rights. But of course, like again, you have people who work a lot, who have social other problems, they have foreclosures and so on. So it's also quite difficult to, let them know that this is maybe not okay from the part of Amazon. And about the reactions. Well, in Poland, as I described, there was this judicial case which the trade unions won. And after that, important thing that I didn't mention again is that the ADAPT system, this algorithmic management system, was turned off in Poland in 2020. And Amazon justifies this by COVID restrictions, but actually they didn't do it in the Czech Republic. So apparently this court case, it actually worked, so it can work. And I think it's really important that the information about what the Polish did gets out, because it can be quite efficient. But again, like from what I saw in the Czech Republic, people don't know this, people don't know their rights, yeah, so it's difficult. And also it's important to highlight that there's a lot of like reserve workers. So anytime somebody is fired, for instance, for going into strike, which it shouldn't happen, I know, but it does, then he can be replaced quite quickly. So yeah, it's a very precarious situation for these workers, and even though they know that they are abused, or even though that they know that in some way they are abused, they don't know it's like their rights. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Clara. So yeah, Federico had one question for Camille, which was related to GDPR. You mentioned in your presentation that GDPR is sometimes used by authorities as a shield not to disclose information. Do you think something should be changed with the regulation, or are the reasons for refusals by authorities inaccurate?
It's a good question, and thanks for that, Federico. I don't know if the reasons would be inaccurate. I think they're probably in line with what the GDPR regulation says, even though I have to admit I'm not an expert on the GDPR regulation, which I think in itself is highly complicated. But what we found, what we looked at during our investigation, was in part conflict of interest. And there were a couple of cases where people working, that we found were people working in the EU ended up shortly or even directly after their work for the EU, going into the private sector, working on AI, advising big business on AI and lobbying. And I think that could clearly invite questions over conflict of interest. And I think you could also legitimately argue that there's a public interest in knowing about any of these issues. So what we when we asked European Commission about a couple of these specific cases, they basically said we cannot comment or release any documents because doing so would violate the personal data of the person involved. I think in especially in these type of cases, we did find that, okay, maybe GDPR is in this case a helpful tool for people in positions of power to say, well, sorry, if we were to comment on this specific case, despite the fact that we have sort of legitimate reason to think there's a conflict of interest, we couldn't really say anything about how we internally took the decision that allowed this person to leave the commission and join this company, because there is a process that they have to go through, but they can't say anything about it. So I am sort of not sure how that would involve amending, or if there would need to be provisions within the GDPR for this. But I do think that within this, it's interesting how sort of people that are in positions of power and authority are able to invoke the GDPR rule, whereas at the same time, what we're seeing with the increased use of artificial intelligence and automated decision making, ordinary citizens are asked to upload more and more of their personal information in these type of systems. And for a lot of us, it's not possible to invoke GDPR to say we don't want that. So I think there's an imbalance there. I don't know immediately how to resolve that, but I definitely think it's worth for us all to think about.
I just wanted to add up on Camille's answer on GDPR. Basically, as you mentioned, I think that the main issue is that there is also like this power game as well, that people who want to be protected by GDPR, usually those who violate certain rules, they actually have a lot of resources to do that. So they have lawyers who then hunt different organizations and people and claim that they need to remove certain content or that they cannot access certain information simply because their privacy rules have been violated. Then on the other hand, I think institutions are not really well equipped, neither in institutions or big tech, with the knowledge what is actually in the public interest or not. So they at the end decide to basically side with those who complain simply because they have lawyers behind them, and then decide in contrary of the public of interest. And then people who actually are in need of information, mostly of them are journalists, actually don't have these resources. I, for example, had a lot of cases where really powerful people asked us to remove content claiming that this is violation of GDPR, etc. We would always, of course, reject. But then we had few cases where they would go to Google and then ask the articles to be removed from the Google search. And then Google search would automatically remove that without consulting journalists. And then you just received like a small notification in your email from Google Analytics that says, look, this URL is removed. If you want to complain, this is your section. And then you complain as a publisher, but then it takes, in our case, it took like 5 to 6 months to actually explain to Google that something needs to be restored and that they actually made a mistake. But at the end, you as a publisher or as a journalist don't have any kind of reparation or anything like that, or compensation for your lost time. And this I'm telling simply that because we are like an investigative outlet and we have resources. And I know many journalists, freelancers, small media outlets who don't have understanding and don't have resources. So I think GDPR actually, it regulated some things, but also it really affected what is considered information of public interest. And I know when I was checking this as well with some colleagues, there is actually not so much case law on this matter. So at the end, it's more or less arbitrary decisions. So I think if we would have in the future a lot cases brought in relation to GDPR, then it would be far more difficult by big companies and public institutions to actually ignore the requests. There is one more question from Sarah in relation to Amazon story. Clara, do you know who developed, programmed these systems for Amazon? Did Amazon develop it itself or buy it from another company?
As far as I know, it is a proprietary Amazon system. So, of course, it's a huge company. It has a lot of programmers, and they can do it themselves. This is something that is quite secretive, actually. I was asking quite often if my interviewees knew where the data, for instance, is stored and processed, and this is something that they apparently keep very secretive. And also, one more thing: the system in Amazon is really centralized. So you have Seattle with the headquarters, then you have the European headquarters, then you have Germany. For instance, the Czech Amazon, it goes to Germany. It's direct its direct boss. Actually, the system is very interconnected. Therefore, for instance, I had a guy who was a former team leader, and he went to the UK, and he just got different access rights to the data of workers, and then he was able to see them within the same system. Then he would come back to Czechia, and he would still see them until his access was abolished. So to just highlight how this is really interconnected a lot. Yeah. Also, maybe as we are ending, I would like to have one general comment. I think when it comes to algorithmic management, we really talk a lot about delivery apps, also about Amazon. I think these are the popular topics, but I really think we should dive more into logistics in general, because this is a huge system stemming from China, how the stuff are brought into Europe on the ships, how they are stored, where they are stored. There's apparently no one who has accountability for this, no one who really understands how it works, and algorithms are already ruling this world. They are ruling this world because it will be impossible without them. And yeah, so I think we should just focus on this. I would like to do it myself, for instance.
I agree. Camille, do you want to add something? Last words before I close?
Yeah, just very quickly, 2 points. I think the point about Clara and logistics sounds really interesting. Very interested to investigate that with you. But also, I think the second bit, what you said about Amazon being a huge developer of these algorithmic systems, and they're all proprietary. I think as we're seeing more and more AI in the public sector, which really was what our story sort of looked at, we see that there's a huge interest for big tech in there, because most of the public sector institutions don't have expertise to build these systems themselves. So in the end, who's going to build them? It's the Amazons of the world. And I think we need to be very well aware of that, because that's what it means when we say we want more AI in the public sector.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to end with a question. Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Clara, for the discussion, and really thank you a lot for the great stories that you did, and I hope you will continue in the future. I also want to thank everyone who joined us. I know it's not easy today to take 1 hour of your time and spend it on online debates. So we are really grateful